It was already deep autumn in the city, and it rained almost every day. People went about their business without noticing anyone around them. Under the roof of the tiny store, as if not noticing no one around, sat Ching Chin and his old friend, Jiang. The muffled tapping of chips against the game board could be heard in the store. The young player deftly and decisively moved the chips, anticipating the moves of the opponent, which really surprised him. He didn't understand how he, a professional player, was being beaten. Chin Chin victoriously moved the last chip, which brought him victory. The old man, so as not to look defeated, began to justify himself to the boy, but the boy was not the least bit interested. He knew that in this game, as in the previous ones, he had no equal. The older man wanted to say something, but knew that his silly excuses would put him in an even more awkward position. He watched the last of his winning money being taken from his piggy bank, trying to pity him by talking about how he'd gotten it. Chin Chun explained that this was the cycle of money in nature, and if someone else played money with him, he would be less likely to visit the store. Uncle Gene had lost all desire to play, only to find that the boy was a bad teacher. But to this, the young man only reminded that the one cannot beat only him, the rest fail. These words cheered up the old man, and he decided to have a rematch. Such determination amused the young man, but extra money never hurts. The boy covered his eyes, and it was as if time had stopped. He began to dig into the recesses of his memory. He remembered every move of his opponent, every movement of the chips on the board. He kept all of this in his memory, never losing sight of the slightest detail over the years. He had accumulated a considerable number of such memories. On among them, like a shelf of books, he found the very ones. Those memories of being taught to play Shani himself, all those rules he was told to memorize. That's what he said to his opponent when he made the move, adding about Jiang's winning game in the park against another player. Chin Chin reminded about the 13 techniques of giving up the knight, which are sacred in the game, and how it makes it easier to win. To this, the shopkeeper only grinned. He wanted to finally defeat the boy in order to elevate himself from the other Shuni players, to which he received a negative reply because no one had been able to beat Ching Chun for a long time. The city holds a Shangi championship every year. The protagonists could achieve high success and make money from it. But it's one thing to beat the old men in the parks with the help of a good photographic memory, and another to compete with the professionals. The rain finally stopped, and a blindingly bright sun shone in the sky, sharking everything in its rays. A young family and their son were walking leisurely along the sidewalk, happy to see the end of the rain. Hearing this voice and the stomping of familiar heels, Chin Chun turned around to confirm his guesses. He was right. It was his mother Wanan. Her face is still as beautiful as ever, with a trace of years already visible on it. Her hair also styled as before, and her eyes burning amber in the sunlight. And here they are standing opposite each other alike, but so far away no one dares to take a step, as if a wall were preventing them. Chin Chin wanted to say something, but he didn't dare. His mother also looked at him and could not find words. She saw how her first son had grown, how he had matured only little, who didn't understand what was happening, tried to find out what was wrong. And so they stood opposite each other, each thinking about his own thoughts. She knew he blamed her, knew he would never forgive her, and he didn't think anything, just stared, and couldn't understand why. It was a question he often asked himself. After gaining more air, Wang took the first step, but Chin Chin didn't listen. He turned around and started to walk away. She wanted to run after him, but she didn't. The woman realized he wouldn't listen to her. When she came closer to Uncle Gene, who was meticulously stacking his chips in a wooden box, she asked why her son chose to play Shangi instead of school lessons. The old man indifferently told her about Ching Chen's money troubles. Finally putting the game together under Wan Fong's musings about the money transferred every month for his son's living expenses and tuition, the old man Hurley withdrew. Worrying about her eldest son pushed out the fact that today she and her new family were celebrating her youngest son's birthday, and they had to go to the movies. The new husband insisted that all of W. Fong's attention should be on Ha Ha today, and that the eldest son could wait until the weekend. The woman, through sheer force, agreed with him. When Ching Chin came home, the same picture as always awaited him. Alcohol cans and bottles are strewn about the floor. Is dirty in the corner at the table sits an inebriated father, holding what is probably not his first bottle of the day. Whenever his son asked him a question, his father always replied that he had no money or else go and live with his mother. Usually such conversations ended with endless accusations of everything that had happened to the mother and the only son. Ching Chin had long ago stopped paying attention to his father's words. He had always been cold and unloving towards him, bowing violence towards his son. Under the sleeve on his right arm was a countdown clock. This watch appeared on the guy's arm one day. Every day he looks at it and sees how much time is left. Seeing the 5 hours on his hand, Ching Chin realized that there wasn't much left. This amused him and frightened him at the same time. The guy decided to do something in the last hours of his life, and even though he didn't know what would happen next, perhaps death or another bright life awaited him. One way or another, the young man decided to prepare, so he went to the market to get supplies. The boy returned when it was already dark, carrying shopping bags. On the bedside table was a flashlight with spare batteries in case of a power outage. He also put some tools on the side table there. He didn't know where or when he would end up, but it was worth preparing. Sitting perhaps for the last time on his bed chin, Chan's mind was in a veritable riot of thoughts. Maybe he should have asked for help from someone, but there was no one to ask for it. My hands were treacherously shaking, whether from fear or adrenaline from the adventure. He stood at the window and began to pray. This was what helped the boy's soul to calm down and to be sure that it would find peace. The preparations have come to an end, which means we can wait for the end without fuss. A message popped up on my phone screen from my mom from 2 weeks ago. It was nothing like that, just money forwarded. The memory of her made Ching Chen's heart clench again. Their encounter at Uncle Zhang's place kept his mind reeling. She looked happy with her new family. The boy remembered what their family had been like. He blamed his father for it falling apart, remembered how his mother had to endure beatings and insults from her husband. Wu Fong divorced her husband but decided not to take her son. She wanted to make a life for herself first and then take him to live with her. But not taken away, Chin Chun was left alone with his father. Memories of a happy family warmed his soul and at the same time fueled his hatred for his mother. A lump formed in my throat from all this, and my eyes treacherously began to form tears. In the last 2 hours of his life, the guy decided to do something brave. Unlike everyday actions, he got on his bicycle and put on a raincoat, regardless of the weather, rushed to one place. He drove as fast as he could. The rain and wind were no obstacle to him, just to get there in time to do what he had planned. Driving up to the house, the boy was convinced that this was the place he dialed the police number to report an illegal gambling club run by the Luton gang. These people take the last of the old people's money. On the other end of the tube, it was reported that an outfit had been put forward for inspection, and Chin Chin, with a sense of relief, drove away from the courtyard. It started raining again. People ran into stores to wait out the weather cars drove by in an endless stream. Halfway home, the guy saw police officers rushing by with their beacons on no Ching Chin, didn't regret what he had done. He knew it was the right thing to do. Soaking wet, the young man threw off his wet clothes and went to the shower to wash off the remnants of a hard day. The timer was showing 52 minutes, the last 52 minutes of Ching Chan's life. He wrote a note in case anyone was looking for him. He knew they wouldn't, but in case someone remembered. The guy stopped being of any use to anyone a long time ago. For the last few seconds, he thought of Uncle Shang's store, where he came every week to play shangi. Thought police officers arresting members of the Layan community. He reminisced about his childhood, when the whole family was together, and how happy his mother was now with her new family. That's it, the last second, and that's it. End of suffering, the end of everything. In an instant, everything around me was black, and the outlines of all things were accentuated in blue. It was like a boy in a computer game. But Chin felt that this was not the reality that was there. It was something different, something borderline between worlds. He took a step accompanied by the cracking of glass like brittle ice at the first frost. The glass shattered into shards. One more step, and the whole world that the boy knew shattered into millions of pieces, flying somewhere into the void. In this void, clearly visible, number 010101. But what they mean the hero has yet to learn. Shards of the past carried away, mere memories, events, dates, all the things that Chin cherished, hated, and loved. Flying in the void, he was only concerned with one question: how it would all end, whether it was death or a new life. His thoughts were interrupted by a bright light coming from the depths of the abyss. It made his eyes water unpleasantly. Just a moment, and the hero was lying on something soft. The bright light changed to a subdued, pleasant to the eye. He opened his eyes, but saw nothing. His eyes was returning to normal, but it was clear that this was not the end, but the beginning of something new. His body was weakened, but curiosity was stronger, so the protagonist tried to stand up. His arm was unpleasantly sore, and Chin decided to check it for a countdown. It had a timer on it. This time the new life had 48 hours, which was 2 days. After examining himself from head to toe, the guy came to the conclusion that his body remained the same. Only his clothes had changed in his heart. He believed that in 48 hours, everything would be back to normal. There was nothing remarkable about the room, metal floor and ceiling, large doors and a bed. A noise was heard outside the door, self-preservation instinct, warning that there could be great danger outside. Interest was taking over, so after carefully approaching the door, Chin began to listen in. Suddenly, the doors began to open, flooding the entire room with light. A loudspeaker announced the beginning of a new day. A loudspeaker announced the beginning of a new day, demanding that all prisoners go to the mess hall for breakfast. The words imprisoned made the hero tense up. The thought flashed through his mind that a new life was beginning in prison. Still deciding to leave the room to confirm his guesses, Chin took a step into the unknown. The information was coming from a man of pleasant appearance from large screens in the center. The young man had not expected to see such a picture. It piqued his interest even more. A large, spacious room with several floors arranged around the perimeter of the building opened before my eyes. In the center, there were large screens from which information was sounding. Prisoners started coming out of each room. The guy was attracted to one of them, a short old man with metal inserts on his face. Taking a closer look at his face, Chin discovered that the old man had an infrared eye inserted. He had suggested that he was in a mechanical civilization. There's no other way to explain. A mechanical hand suddenly landed on the guy's shoulder. A frightening-looking guy appeared before my eyes. He had a foul stench coming off him that made it impossible to breathe deeply. His prosthesis, still the same, rested on his shoulder, pressing its parts into his skin with each passing minute. Without ordering anything but only grinning, the guy left, followed by 2 other men, as unpleasant-looking as the first one. It was clear from their conversation that they were common bullies. When he heard that he was called a newcomer, the young man was puzzled how he could be one if he came from another world. But he decided to keep these thoughts to himself. On the parallel lower floor, one of the prisoners was running with a piercing scream. He was under unprecedented stress from this place, but he wouldn't stop screaming and breaking free from the grip. But it was all in vain. In him, Chin recognized an acquaintance of his from school. This made him think that he was not the only one in the same situation in this place. Order in the prison was monitored by special drones that signaled them in case of danger. They concentrated in one place on one target. The young man marveled at how advanced technology was in this world. When he reached the canteen, he saw robots that looked more like something between a human and a machine. All of them kept order and disarmed. Intruders, these machines were controlled by artificial intelligence, which helped to optimize the prison's security system. The robots were heading in formation toward the target. Their target, it was the protagonist's acquaintance, Hang Aijin. His behavior violated the rules of the prison, and for that there is a punishment. Ching could only watch from afar. Perhaps under other circumstances he would have intervened, but here it was clear that he would also be punished. The prisoners watched with a smile. It was not the first time they had observed this picture. The newcomers often tried to escape. Several inmates spoke wryly about the problems of tax collectors, which the classmate was, but the guy couldn't do anything. After the incident, the prisoners went to the mess hall in formation. Keeping order, no one wanted to break the rules. The tables were filling up with people, but only the tables around the one trio remained empty that really interested the guy. At the head of the table sat a middle-aged man with fresh stubble and shoulder-length grey hair. He was dressed differently from the other prisoners in a white tailcoat. Between his fingers, he was going over a chip from Zen's game. Next to him on the table sat a white cat. It seemed to complement the image of the man. Chun was very interested in this person. It was clear that this man was not the last person in the colony. Standing behind the stranger like two bodyguards, the men were younger than the ringleader. Chun was interested in one of them. He was a young man with sharp facial features, blonde hair. Many people would find his appearance quite attractive. The man on the screen demanded to go to the dining room without obstruction on a first-come, first-seared basis. The prisoners slowly made their way to the eating place. Each one talked about something different. Chin didn't miss the opportunity to explore the place where he was staying. There was shouting in the queue again. Huan Shen was tearing himself out of the prisoner's hands. They in turn calmed him down. The hero looked around, and the man with the infrared eye decided to warn the newcomer. Chin was looking for a place to eat, but everyone around only made it clear that the place next to him was not for a guy. The young hero looked around and realized that the very same inmate bullies were getting around him. Realizing the plan, Chinin decided to take action. He abruptly started running away from the men. Each of them tried to knock the guy down, but thanks to his agility and quickness, no one could manage. If the only right and saving decision for the boy was to run in the direction where the trio he was interested in was sitting. The prisoners laughed at this because they knew that he would not be rescued there. No one dares to enter the gang's territory without permission. The high-ranking person was still sitting at the table as well. Turning his attention to the guy running towards them, one of the bodyguards stopped Chin with a DEA hand movement. He cut short the lad's hopes of rescue. Chin suggested that the high-ranking person play a game of xiangqi. The man took him up on his offer for the game. After studying the positions of all the pieces on the board, the young man determined the tactic, capture the king. Pictures of the rules for winning this game popped into my head. After pondering his next move, the guy makes a move. Such decisiveness in action stunned the opponent. The game was being watched by everyone around them. No one challenged the number one. With each move, the opponent had fewer chips left. And then finally, Chen's victory. This provoked unprecedented anger in his opponent. He discarded his last chip, giving the victory too. This game interested number one, so he suggested, did we play again tomorrow? After that, the high-ranking man left, leaving behind him the whispers of defeat of the prisoners. The acquaintance with number one was a success. At Chen's feet was a guy previously unknown to him. He was begging for help, but the young guy wasn't interested in any way. He begged for mercy, urging them to let him go, but nothing stopped the bullies. They took him away. Chin came to the conclusion that there were not many ordinary people here, but this gave some hope and confidence in the future. But these thoughts brought back memories of the past, of a father and mother who didn't care about their son. The young man felt alone in the world. He realized that without the countdown, it would be a different life. But this life had meaning too. It's all something else uncharted by anyone. A guy appeared behind me. He walked very close to Ching, trying to establish contact with him. Upon introduction, the guy recognized the name of his new acquaintance, Xiao, who had arrived at the prison 3 months ago. But the hero couldn't trust anyone, especially in a place like this. But the new acquaintance persistently offered his help. Ching clearly didn't like this kind of insistence from the guy, but he couldn't rudely refuse. Xiao tried to uncover the hero's devious plan, but to no avail. He just wasn't there. The guy told me the name of the opponent in the Shangi game is Le Chatong, who will make life in prison much better." The guy apologized for his rant and turned the conversation to a more peaceful direction. These words about Le Chatong only fueled interest in the man. The Shudo gang sat in the digital library. They were studying the news. There was no way Xiaxia could stop talking about the new kid who beat the boss. Xuan observed that in all his actions he endeavored to preserve life, noting sufficient education and determination in the game. Their conversation was interrupted by information about Gu Chan's new dangerous criminal. Yu Wang's task was to make contact with him, to which the boy merely remarked that it was difficult to communicate with this man, but he knew it was necessary, so he would do his best. The topic of conversation came down to today's incident in the cafeteria with the new guy. Xiaxia noted the confidence with which he spoke of his corporations, but no one had heard of them before. Having done his own investigation by a young man about this guy's identity, nothing he said was in it. This interested Shudo, but also wanted to know all the information about his opponent in the game. Xiaxia understood his task and would soon find out everything about him. Qin appeared in the library. Without much interest, he pulled a clipboard from the shelf and began to study it. One of the ringleaders decided to help you use the gadget. But the guy only wanted to know the latest news from the world, and as it turned out, he didn't have access. The news was only available to a high-ranking person, which means his freedom in that prison. Qin tried to disengage himself from the acquaintance, thanking him for his help. But he noticed how quickly the hero flips pages, did not hurry to leave. The protagonist drove his finger across the screen, flipping page after page. This made the gang suspicious. They saddled the conclusion that Qing just wanted to fit in with the company, to which Shou grinned. After 3 hours, the boys decided to leave the library. At this time, the young man was still sitting there as well, stroking the screen. To be sure of his conjecture, the man named one of the stanzas and a line. But Qin easily answered this question by naming the right phrase from the book. The bodyguards had not expected such a quick response, but the answer was right. The protagonist realized the gang's intentions to see if he was following them, but the men hurried away. They came into the dining room. Xiaxia came with information about Qing. As it turned out, he was completely clean, no outstanding things about him. Except for one, he went to prison for stealing a cell phone, which wasn't like the other inmates. And also his surname wasn't quite ordinary. Xiaxia's face changed. Lu Xuan realized that this was a serious matter. Qin's last name was Qing. It belongs to a serious corporation. People with such a surname are not commoners. The scout didn't understand why exactly why the corporation had sent him. Before him was Lu Guang. He suppressed the prisoners with his prosthetics. A civil war broke out in the prison. The corporation always wanted El Shou out of the way. He was in their way in many ways. So there were a lot of questions about the new guy, why exactly he was sent to prison 18, if he was nothing. It was clear that Lu Bangi was just upon pawn, and Qin the one in charge. Lu Shutan realized that the reason for the newcomer's arrival here might be the corporation's shadow election. Shadows specialize in dirty work. They are the ringleaders of the corporation's underworld. They are ruthless and strong, disturbing the general peace. Qin's biography is so clean that it's suspicious, so the gang would like to find out more information about him. After all, capturing someone from the Chen Corporation is very lucrative. Sean decided to share some posts on organizations: the Mountain, Taming Tiger, the Shrewd Hawk, the Belligerent Wolf, the Nimble Leopard, the Loyal Dog. Xiaxia decided to find out who he was in their organization. The answer surprised him. A loud scream is heard from one of the prisoners in the mess hall. It catches everyone's attention. A robot would hover over the new guys and electrocute them for infractions. The prisoners only laughed at the situation. They also noticed that the newcomer Qin had no trouble finding his seat, which surprised them greatly. Someone's hand appeared on the guy's shoulder. It was Xiaxia pulling the guy behind him, and notified that he no longer had to stand in line for lunch. For his part, the hero's only thought was why the robot guard wasn't responding to Xiaxia's gang. Approaching the high-ranking person's table, Xiaxia saw one of the prisoners blocking his way. One touched him, and the man, seeing who was in front of him, stepped aside sharply to give way. Sitting down at the table, the boy began to take his food. He could hear the other prisoners reacting unhappily, for no one sat so quickly with Chuan. One of the men reassured the newcomer, telling him that opponents on the boss game in Shani were given special treatment. Lu Xuan leisurely took his food. Guardian robots notify you that it's time to go to bed. Upon arriving at Qin-chan's cell, he began to wash his face. He kept wondering how, in such a short time, he had managed to befriend the leader of the prison and earned such authority from everyone. Looking at himself in the mirror, the guy didn't recognize himself. He looked very tired. As soon as his head touched the pillow, the guy started to fall into a dream. He found himself in a large house with a fireplace never seen in it before. There were various items scattered all over the first floor, and it was filthy all around. The boy's attention was drawn to Bear, who lay with his belly ripped open by a knife. The house was creepy. There was blood on the floor.
A voice came from behind the door. It was a policeman asking to open the door.
Opening the door in front of him, the guy saw a young policeman. He, in turn, without delay, went inside the building. He reported a forced inspection of the house. The man headed up the stairs, examining the blood beneath his feet. Sheenin closed the door, but he heard the same police officer's request to open the door. In the young man's mind, all he could think about was how the policeman who was already inside found himself outside by the front door. The guy couldn't make up his mind to open the door. Walking into the room with the fireplace, he looked closely at the bear with the knife sticking out. It reflected the guy unnaturally. The young man made an attempt to pull the knife out of the toy, but someone prevented him from doing so. The knife was firmly planted in the bear. The only way out of this was to simply break the knife. And then, knife still in hand, it didn't seem so small. It was a barrier. As soon as the knife broke, my memory came back. The guy realized that the policeman was Xia Sha. He hadn't expected such ingenuity from the young man. Hesitated. Usually people got out of his dreams so easily. Taking the knife, Chin liked upstairs behind the policeman. But he didn't have time. Xia Sha was already coming downstairs. He confessed that it was his dream. And he told me what it was all about, and also about his powers as a dream maker. The protagonist came to the inference that this world was not only mechanical, but mystical. Since the dream didn't help to find out the truth, Xia Sha decided to find out directly if Chin was a person from the Qin Corporation. But the hero did not know the answer to this question himself. Therefore, no one got the exact answer to the question. Xia admitted that he had seen the young man interacting with another person from the Qin Corporation, Lu Guang. He expressed his desire to join the ranks of Shon's organization, Qin. A man in a policeman's uniform got too close to the protagonist. In a hoarse voice, he asked a question about the Qin Corporation and the purpose of the young lad's arrival prison. But only Wan Luong knew all of these answers. That's where the dream stopped. The protagonist opened his eyes. They were vaulted from the unpleasantly bright light in the room. The countdown showed 20 hours, which suggested the end of this world too. The Xa Tong gang was already sitting in the dining room. Xia Sha talked about the night's adventure. There was no way he could understand how the newcomer came out of his dream easily. The leader noticed that the boy had a strong will. This was to let Sha know that the usual means of influence would not work on him. That's why we need others more persuasive and decisive. There was pleasant music coming from the colony in the morning. She seemed very familiar to the protagonist, like it was from his past world. He decided to go to the sound where the song was coming from. It was coming from the table of El Shonk gang. Chin walked over to him. Xia did not miss the opportunity to wryly reminisce about the hero's nighttime adventure. A high-ranking person intervened in the conversation. He claimed that not many people could resist Xia's ability so easily. The protagonist wondered how he could get the same abilities. He received a short answer. That this way is not the most interesting. Lu's way is much more exciting. One can only guess what influence this person has over the world. The interlocutor explained that this path can only be traveled by those who have a certain talent and ability. But it was idle talk, so he suggested that we play Xiami. Xuan carefully watched every move. But the victory was won by the young player. The opponent had to admire the boy's ingenuity in choosing a move. The prisoners watching the game were amazed at this outcome. It was the second time the leader had been beaten by a newcomer. Guani wanted to learn how to play the game. It would help him get closer to Xuan as well as a beginner. Chinan decided to ask a question about the morning song that Lu was singing. Such questions had never been asked of him before, which caused genuine surprise among the whole gang. The guy's request was to hear the song in its entirety after all he had heard it somewhere in his previous life. A man had never been asked to do that before he sang. The song flowed throughout the dining room, but the end remained unsung. The last line was lost. The young man was delighted by this rendition of the song. It was as if a shard from the outside world had reached here. Lou thanked the guy and told a story about the founder of the organization who composed the song. After breakfast, the protagonist went to the library, but I couldn't sit alone. Guani began to give us meaningless information about himself. He also expressed his desire to learn Shangi. Such a desire was due to the increase of authority of beat someone important. Such motivation was inappropriate for learning the game. But Shannon still agreed. The hand was showing the last 5 minutes. Maybe they're the last for this world. In a way, it was sad to leave. He had met some people here and wanted to know about his mission in this world. He asked himself the same question, would he come back here again? Time ran out and shards of memma scattered like before in the abyss. The young hero found himself in a familiar place. It was his home. In his hands was still the same knife he had taken before being sent to the other world. The phone showed the time as 00001. The day was the same. In the normal world, only 1 second had passed. But in the mechanical world, 2 whole days had passed. Such a phenomenon could save the hero from unnecessary questions about his disappearance. The guy was also allotted 47 hours for this world. The hero's phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. The person introduced himself as a police officer and asked to confirm the identity of Chin Chen's father. His father was accused of organizing gambling in the place where the boy called the police. But the young man was not going to get his father out of jail. It was payback for everything he had done. The familiar surroundings helped to relax and sleep, leaving the difficult day behind. The next morning, the boy was off to school. He saw his classmate with whom they sat next to each other in class. He was troubled. It was evident in his movements, words, and actions. Noticing his comrade's strange behavior, Chin decided to inquire about his neighbor's condition. After a while, the classmate spoke up himself. He claimed something strange had happened to him that night, but there were no specifics. A commotion started in the classroom. The boys were watching an interview with a man who claimed to have been in the mechanical world that night. Taking the phone in his hands, it was clear he too, like Chin, was there. A businessman noticed a countdown on his hand at night. After the time expired, he went to the mechanical world. But when he returned, instead of a human hand, he had a mechanical prosthesis. It was made according to the latest technology and did not differ from a normal hand. Chin should realize that the technology of the other world was far superior to that of the ordinary world. The decision this man made was the right one. I couldn't figure out how a whole prosthesis could come from another world. News of new people who had been to the mechanical world was all over the internet. Classmates vividly discussed the possibility of finding similar travelers at their school. Each of the teens discussed the world, its possibilities, its secrets. But all this talk was about the good side of the world. No one thought about the dangers that awaited there. The guy's friend did not stop talking about this world, about the possibility of getting there, but he realized that ordinary people could not get there. New details from interworld travelers were popping up on the internet every hour this day. It was the topic of the day. Everyone was talking about it. There were even copycats popping up, those who wanted to be in the news headlines. There were rumors of travelers all over the school all day. It seemed to the protagonist that such popularity can cause wrong and maybe even dangerous consequences for everyone. A guy decided to visit an acquaintance he met in prison. When he approached one of the teachers, he found out about his residential address. The young man wanted to make sure that his condition after the incident in prison remained the same. A new strategy game, a previously unknown game authored by Shia Shah, appeared on the internet. It was based on an unreal mechanical world with its own plots. The guy made a decision that the world where ordinary people are to call external, and in which the mechanisms rule to call internal. The game interested the protagonist. He decided to play it. The game could evolve along 3 storylines. Each of them was unique and depended on the player's choice. The first plot has to do with the hero's transformation into a creature with mechanical prosthetics, thanks to which he would be invincible. The second plot was the transformation of his character by mutations at the DNA level. The third plot developed in prison number 18, where the goal was to follow NPS Li Xuan. All of these plots were painfully familiar to our protagonist. It seemed that the game was built in another world in which our hero visited. He decided to start playing. The topic of crossing worlds has been a hot topic for a week, but afterward came the disappointing news. A young man who was suspected of traveling was killed in his home by an unknown ascent. The prosthetics that had taken the place of his legs had been severed from his body. Travelers who revealed their identity became anxious about their lives. The killing was due to the assumption that by killing the wanderer, you would replace him. Qinchen's deskmate changed in his face. When he noticed this, he warned his friend of the possible consequences if he revealed his journey. The young man's face grew even more pale. Since Qinchin only knew one traveler, he headed towards him. Reaching the elite residential complex, the guy observed such a picture. 2 guards were escorting the guy. The protagonist came to see out of the courtyard. They got in the car together and drove away, leaving the boy alone with his thoughts. As he walked home, he felt the heavy gaze of the man behind him. Unable to think of anything better, he pulled out his cell phone and pretended to start talking on it. Suspicious man walked by, but already, at the nearest traffic light, Shinen realized that the pursuer was not alone. To test his hunch, the guy didn't cross the road, but abruptly turned around and walked back. The stalker reported the matter to the employer. Losing sight of the currents from their sight, they took it to look for it. The protagonist, realizing that he was no longer being followed, decided to sit at the bus stop for a while and then go home. A police car was past the young man. Residents from this house discussed they came to visit a family from a neighbor house where the husband often beats his wife. This time, the ambulance was taking the husband away. His wife had beaten him to a pulp. She was helped in this by prosthetics from the mechanical world. She snapped his arm in one motion and slid him down the stairs. Their young daughter watched the whole thing. She was spotted by the hero and decided to help her. When asked if everything was okay, she looked at the heroes with tearful eyes and cried even more. The guy just pulled her against him, letting her know she was safe. Our hero knew about this family. He lived opposite their house and often watched the daughter and mother sitting and crying on a bench, hiding from her father. Qinchin would always come out to her if she was alone and distract her from this horror. She even called him brother. The boy offered to give fried rice to the girl, to which she agreed, and went with him to the apartment. At home, Shinen heard some loud noises in the courtyard. 2 men got out of the car, the same ones who had been following him. Apparently they were from the organization for catching travelers. My thoughts were on the poor girl's fate. What would happen to her if her mother was taken away and her father was in the hospital? After a while, the agents came out of the house, but they were alone. There was a knock at the door, and he hurried to open it. Toon's mother was standing on the doorstep of his apartment. She had come to pick up her daughter. But the girl didn't want to go back home where the tragedy happened. As a neighbor, Chinen offered to treat the mother and daughter to dinner. They reluctantly agreed. During dinner, the guy decided to find out what it was like to visit the inner world. But the woman didn't really want to talk about it. She was still scared. She also told about a questionnaire that 2 men from the organization had asked her to fill out. The young man wanted to learn as much as he could about this woman and her role in the inner world. She was an employee at the hospital, which she showed up at after the countdown. In order not to arouse suspicion, the boy cautiously asked about prison number 18. Supposedly, he had learned about it from one of the travelers. But the woman had little or no accurate information. Toon intervened in the conversation. She couldn't understand how Mum was a doctor if she didn't know how. All the questions made the woman suspicious. She decided to warn the boy about that world, about its danger. The guy decided to let it go and continued eating his rice. In gratitude for the dinner, the woman decided to clear the table. She talked about how she wanted to proceed about moving to her mother's town, about her future life there. But the woman was unable to buy tickets. Her access was restricted. In that instant, Chin-chun realized what that phone was, for it was to keep the travelers out of the city. Most likely this mysterious organization has connections at the top Taking a seat on the couch next to the girl, she looked at him strangely. She assumed the guy liked her mom, but the guy denied it. After finishing cleaning up, the woman and her daughter head back to the apartment, without giving him a chance to ask the questions he wanted to ask. In the evening, the boy received a call from his mother for the first time in 2 weeks, but the conversation was very cold. She simply informed him that she had sent the money and would not be able to visit her son. The boy laid down on the bed and fell asleep. The countdown showed him 20 hours. When he went outside and looked at the balcony, the protagonist saw his washed clothes. The woman had waved them as a token of gratitude. He looked out the window and saw her beckoning him to breakfast. After that, the guy went to school at the entrance. He was stopped by a classmate. He told about the incident with a guy from a parallel class who turned out to be a world traveler. In Chin-chan's mind, the only question on Chin-chan's mind was how many travelers there were in his city. The same traveler came out of the vice principal's office. He followed the principal. In class, the boy's mind was far from lessons, but on how to keep his secret. A new strategy notification from Shia arrived on my phone. This time the path was to fight for the Chen Corporation's shadow seat and was told in detail. The countdown report showed 6 hours. The hero realized that his roommate would also end up in prison number 18. That night he warned his friend. With that warning, the guy ran off to get ready to move. On the doorstep of his apartment was Tun Yin's mom. My fear is that after the countdown ends, she may not come back. Her request to the boyfriend was about taking care of her daughter for that time. The boy's eyes widened in surprise, and he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Does the girl think that she will not return? But unfortunately, this world is very dangerous and cruel, and no one knows what will happen tomorrow. Drops of crystal-clear tears slowly flowed down her face. They were tears of despair. Our hero tried to cheer her up, but it seemed to have absolutely no effect. The girl gave the key to the house to our hero, because in an unforeseen situation, he may need it. The boy looked at his hand in bewilderment as the door slowly closed. The key that lay in his hand now could be construed as complete trust in him. The guy swallowed an object from our world to see if he could carry it with him. The timer was moving towards 0, and there was less and less time left. Sitting down on the bed, our hero silently waited for the inevitable. When the timer reached 0, his body turned into a digital copy. The transition to another world began. He was already lying in his prison robe, covering his eyes. From the bright light with his hand, he couldn't help smiling, for he was in the same place as last time, though that made him happy. Now he needed to understand whether each transition was really a continuation of the past, and for this, he slowly but surely began to rise from the bed. The item that he took from our world has traveled with him across the border between worlds, and it can be used in the future. Yes, the wound he left behind in the outside world was also preserved, proving that his body that passed through the border was completely unchanged. He would be able to recognize the whole mechanism of crossing worlds. He thought about it and heard a metallic clanking sound, which meant that the chambers were beginning to open. He got up from the bed and walked to the door. As bad as it was, he missed this place. The timer on his hand was still showing 2 days. I really wonder if that number will change in the future. Our hero walked out of the cell with his head held high in the city, paying absolutely no attention to anyone. The boy was called out, but he only cast a disgruntled glance. After waving his hand, and he went about his business. He realized that yesterday at 12 a.m., a new group of people were supposed to be escorted here, and the second group of travelers should have already entered the inner world, but the guy needed to not give himself away. But among the people of the news set, our hero saw one of his acquaintances and realized that not to give himself away would be a very difficult task. One of the wardens of this prison was shouting from the podium with dew in his voice that all the fun was about to begin, because newcomers had arrived at the prison. Tin Man looked very intimidating. Unclasping his mechanical arm, he greeted all the new players. Yes, at first the warden seemed to our hero not a very good man, but at this stage he even has warm feelings for him. The guy started running fast and looking for someone who knows someone he needs. The bald guy with a disgruntled smirk pointed him where to look, and indeed, in this seat sat the imperious man who was so necessary to our hero. Some guy ran up to his boss but was stopped by a sharp stab into the eye. It was a bodyguard who was very unhappy that the newcomers were looking for the boss. The guy begged for a new assignment. He said it was not his first time here and he knew everything. The bodyguard understood that this guy was never in the organization, and everything he was saying was. The guy knelt down in front of his boss and asked for a promotion mission. The man only looked hotly at this weirdo. Thousands of angry looks fell upon him, for absolutely no one likes such insolent people. The white-haired bodyguard gave order to get rid of him as quickly as possible. With tears in his eyes, this brazen kid absolutely did not understand what went wrong. After all, he went straight to the prison 18, in which the path of the chosen one begins, and now he is simply beaten. The guide begged me not to hurt him, but nobody seemed to hear him. Only by biting one of his captors on the arm was he able to break free. But for how long? The plan may have been a good one, but it was thwarted by the concrete wall the guy was up against. He begged the higher powers to let him out of here as his tormentor slowly but surely approached. When he realized this, he was gripped by a wild terror, a hail of sweat running down his face. Turning around, the insolent man saw a mechanical monster that looked straight into his soul. I think something inevitable is about to happen. Our hero, with a smirk, watched it all. I absolutely did not understand why this crazy guy just arrived in a new world is getting cocky. And the bodyguards at this point have a lot of questions, it seems lately. Everything went a little strange. Because the day before yesterday, one guy went crazy, saying something about a mysterious city, and now came this fool to get a promotion mission. What kind of mission is this anyway? The boss slowly brought the cup to his mouth, agreeing that it all sounded like some kind of nonsense. Meanwhile, everyone was watching the little brat being led away by the guards with mirth and glee. Our hero carefully walked up to one of the senior ranks and began to speak to him carefully so that no one would notice. The guy didn't know if there were any other traveler who were hiding, but even if there are, they're unlikely to be able to make up the identity of the outside world. The boy slowly strolled through the prison, taking refuge in his thoughts. It was reported to him that there were no new travelers. Now the guy needed to have a word with the prison boss, but he was not really in the mood for conversation. He was very much concerned about the guest who would soon come to them. It was a guest that absolutely no one called for, and as we know, an uninvited guest is not very pleasant. The man stroked his cat to calm himself down, and our hero was very much interested in the uninvited guest's question, but he did not really want to interfere. The time on our hero's timer ran inexorably forward, but he turned his attention from that to the sharp sound, and it seems he wasn't the only one who got caught up in it. A man previously unknown to us has set foot in the prison. The bald, tattooed man looked very intimidating. His legs were shackled and he was moving toward our hero with a very disgruntled look. He had a lot of guards around him, so I can deduce that he was a very dangerous man. It was the first time that one man had been escorted by so many guards, and all the guards of prison number 18 were involved. This prisoner seemed interesting enough to our hero, and he couldn't even imagine what brought him here. In the same instant, the bodyguard's eyes practically popped out of his orbits as he was grabbed firmly by someone's hand. It was the hand of the same captive who was lifting the bodyguard higher and higher with each passing second, trying to elicit the answer to his question. He was very much interested in where is the boss of this prison. The bodyguard, barely holding back tears, indicated the direction of travel. Everyone was too surprised, for no one had ever seen such a straightforward and persistent prisoner. Throwing the small one aside, the Jumbo moved towards the boss. No one expected this guest to be so straightforward. His name is Guoan, and he should be known to everyone. The prison boss moved towards the thug, leaving his underlings behind so they wouldn't get hurt. Everyone watched with open mouths and fear-filled eyes as this huge figure moved towards the crowd. The thug decided not to beat around the bush and solve the issue at once. He needs a forbidden object that is in this prison, and if they voluntarily give it to him, he will silently leave and no one will get hurt. Except the boss didn't much like that kind of hut. Groma continued to say that he needs the item, and then no one will get hurt. The boss was wondering why his civilization is interested in secret items, to which Groma replied, replied that he needs to fight with the strongest civilizations in which he will help him, a lot secret. The prison boss didn't understand how people got the information that there was a secret item here, but the bulky man assured him that there were already rumors all over the world that a deal had been made in prison number 18, and the forbidden item that the prison boss personally kept and suppressed must be extremely powerful. The boss only smirked and said that the bulky man was wrong. He had no business with other civilizations. But our hero has realized that the secret item people are talking about is what he needs, and maybe it's his assignment in the Battle of Shadows. Gruler couldn't rest. He needed this secret item and was willing to do anything for it. But Boss only shook his head. He knew the location of this item, but he absolutely wasn't going to tell anyone. The thug angrily stomped his feet, and his fury had no limit. It seemed like he was about to crush the boss if he refused to give him what he wanted. But no one was going to give him anything. The boss had other souls in mind, and it seems we're about to find out about them. A disgruntled thug launched a metal storm in the past. It would have taken half an hour of rioting for it to start, but now it seems there was a red alert level. Our hero was doing some simple math on metal storms in the chapter. The giant was already flying at one of the men. Everything around was iron and very powerful. Bullets sprinkled from the automatic rifles attached to the ceiling, and people began to scatter like ants in different directions. At this time, 36 metal storms were firing rubber bullets purely for the purpose of suppressing the other 36 units, a true lethal weapon. However, there are exceptions to this stormy rain of bullets. The thug tried to smash the man standing across from him. At one point, the branching of the dome began to occur, and in the moment, the thug was stopped by a frail man. They froze like that, the thug, who understood nothing at all, and the man nonchalantly watching his opponent. In an instant, the hail of bullets stopped, and there was not a soul in the room. It took the men a moment to notice that the domes were dissipating, but the man was still very puzzled by something. There are 36 metal storms bearing down on our hero, and he's sitting in the blind spot of all trajectories. The only blind shooting zone in prison is 18. Our hero's temperament and abilities are not possessed by his peers. Maybe the guy can be the successor. The thug was still not giving up. He was really eager for a fight. So in every way possible, he tried to lure the man to him. From the beginning to the end of the fight, he only made his opponent's clothes ripple a few times, especially since it was rumored that Li Shatong was a demigod. But the difference between them is like a chasm. The man couldn't wait to fight anymore. But the man leaving informed that there were no more fights, especially why fight when you can't win. To the man it seemed strange because this bald man was just about to fight to the death, but now suddenly surrendering his approach before and after is very different. Since he knows where the forbidden object is, he will follow it all the time. In one moment, the man wanted to at least somehow bring the bald man to emotion, but it did not work. So he asked, "Our hero has a calculated or position." Well, the guy began to justify that, although his computing ability is much better than that of a normal person, he is still not able to make such a complex calculation and can only guess. But guessing isn't enough to help our hero so accurately find this position. The short calculation allowed the guy to target only 4 areas and places of them where the man sits every day. One of them, the rest, could be left out. While the bald man rested, the robots around him cleaned up. They fight, and ordinary people suffer for those who fought. It's nothing but those prisoners who didn't fight are really unlucky. At one point, a young man approached Guoan and reported that people said of the bald man that he was a compassionate person who performed good bodies, but inquired about those who had been harmed by him. The man reported that there is a prison around, and does he really hurt the innocent? There are no innocent among those who are there. The guy called the man a hypocrite, and the man dared to remind him that he wasn't a monk, and didn't need to use the word compassion to describe him. The man's whole insides ached as if burned by fire. The guy left without getting any response. In an instant, all the people the guy approached were in the dome. The one who didn't get hit by the bullets was also one of them. The same guy asked me not to worry and talk because nothing will be heard around. Turning to our hero, one of the guys reported that in the morning he had seen a thug questioning those people during the ceremony and greeting, and wondered if the guy had told him to do it. But why question them squinted his eyes. The guy's excuse was that she wanted to see what other forces were vying with him for the forbidden object, and thought he needed to find a suitable excuse for his actions. The man stroking the kitty said he liked the honesty, but he could see that the bully wasn't bullying the newcomers this time. And he remembered when the guy first came in, he didn't help the other newcomers. The young man saw that if he could not protect himself, he would quietly watch as everyone else dies and would not help. And this was his principle. Ching Chen's life was never easy, so he learned early on to be selfish. This attitude to life was given to him by life itself. He didn't make a choice. In an instant, one of the guys under the dome began to be disturbed by something. In an instant, the bulky man began to rise into the air on just his index fingers. The guy watching realized that Greer couldn't hear them, so Dad climbed closer, but doesn't he know he's clearly visible? The guy is pretty stupid. In an instant, the bulky man realized he'd been spotted, and he felt kind of bad about sneaking up on his toes. Without getting any response from our hero, the man decided to leave. He was sorry we couldn't play Shangi today, so he went off to read. At this time, people were desperate. It would take a long time to clean up, and some were still in pain from the rubber bullets. The henchman of the man in white clothes came up to the bully again and said that if he lost, it is necessary to recognize it. They do not want to antagonize the pikes, because I know that they're let in hard. Well, you do not need to create problems for anyone. But the thug threatened the guy not to even dare touch the hair on his head. Although he was bald and only had hair in his eyebrows, or rather on his face, it was mealtime. Some sort of liquid was poured over the egg thrown into the plate. As he devoured the food, the guy realized that the prison food, although synthetic, tasted like regular meat, and it was much better than the pressed cookies he ate almost every day. But after a while he realized he was alone in something else. He wondered why a quarter of the cameras were pointed at him, though it was probably because he'd found a shooting blind spot and had attracted someone's attention. He wondered who was behind this prison. At one point, another inmate sweated to the guy, saying that the boss had just told him to tell the cook to replace this meat with real meat and give him as much as he wanted, and he was suddenly wondering why. But the guy jeeringly informs us that our hero will soon realize that none of this is necessarily a good thing. After a while, our hero went to wash his face. His reflection in the mirror was unimpressive, and he had incredibly large black circles under his eyes. He had that strange feeling again. Still, he tried to close his eyes and sleep. The boy slowly began to open his eyes. When he opened his eyes fully, he found himself in the desert with a guy sitting next to him. Our hero was instantly sweating, and his lips were dry, so he immediately pulled out a water bottle. The man will notice the water began to beg to drink, at least a roll of water, because otherwise they will just die, but they will not drink for free. You just need to name the price. And looking into the guy's face, the wanderer still demanded a price. The young man said he would first let the man next to him watch him die of thirst, and then let him name the price. Everyone was surprised that our hero was still human. Being under the starry sky, and by the fire, our hero said that he immediately realized that it was all nightmare. So he did not feel any sympathy. It was really surprising to the wanderer, because he can enter the nightmare stay, conscious, and remember it. Drinking the water, the young man noticed that if you wait 5 minutes and do not fall asleep, you can get rid of the zoo, demon sleep. It was unclear why, if you can resist entering, and our hero thought the young man had something to say, so he came. The young man was already very curious about what our hero wanted to test this time. After a while, the young man informed our hero that at first his boss wanted him to take our hero for a ride, using the nightmare to develop his humanity and allow him to experience suffering. But now, Chin-chun resists the dream demon so easily, it seems that in the future, the nightmare will be useless and the boss must test our hero himself. The boy noted to himself that the scene in the desert was different from the previous one, and even more like a lesson arranged by a teacher for a student. The interlocutor of our hero asked him to calm him down, because the boss is still only admiring him, and no more. It is still unclear whether the guy in the future can become a disciple of the demigod. And at one point, our hero silenced his interlocutor by saying that he was just jealous. The boy didn't refrain from saying so. He was really jealous because not everyone could become the boss's disciple. At least he and Yuan couldn't, because either of them had passed the first test. But the boss thinks our hero should be able to take it well. Or at least that's what the young man thinks. Sitting under the starry sky by the fire, our hero asked countless questions, to which the interlocutor willingly answered our hero had the courage to fight and endure the battle at any cost. After a while, our hero wondered how old Mr. Li Shutong is, because if the guy divides his life equally between the two worlds, does it mean that he will age faster if taken than people in the outside world? And maybe the boss's abilities can go beyond the ordinary. Chin Chin was very surprised when the interlocutor said that the boss was only 52 years old because the man only looked to be about 35 years old. The interlocutor laughed at the expression on our hero's face because he looked as if he had never seen anything in his life. And he himself would not be surprised if a man like the boss even lived more than 100 years. After all, they watched him from childhood, and he did not see that the man for all these years somehow changed. The moment our hero's interlocutor leaned back on his portrait, Chin Chin asked why people follow the boss. The guy half-heartedly replied that there was no supernatural reason, they are all just orphans. Looking at the shooting stars, our hero's companion claiming said that the guy was born into the Chen family, so he did not understand how cruel life is outside or how easy it is to become an orphan, because the parents on the way met a member in the club and got into an altercation. Maybe there was a chemical leak in the factory where they worked, anything can happen. And after a while, the person is no longer able to pay the property tax and the insurance company refused to pay compensation. Then the bank takes the house and throw it on the street. And no one cares if the person is alive at this time. Life is already dark and hopeless, and the club wants to involve the child as drug seers to transport drugs. It was at this time that a man appeared offering to help. More specifically, this man offers to give new life with his hand outstretched. The young man then took a deep breath and concluded by saying that whoever that man was, you would go with him anyway. Our hero listened to this story without making a sound, only wondering if his suffering in life compared to the guy across the street meant anything. Looking at his tired companion across the fire, the young man asked why the old man had taken them in. The boy sighed heavily and said that it was because they were useful people and what he wanted to do could not be done alone. The young man's mind was still in chaos because he still didn't know what the goals of the so-called knights and peaks were, and besides what kind of giant the peaks were up against. But Lia Hong took Lin Sha Sha and Yuan obviously with the intention of using them. However, they didn't seem to mind at all at this time. Lia Sha had already gotten up and suggested that the guy rest until morning. Lying on his bed in solitary confinement, the guy realized that he had already seen the unfathomable and mysterious level of Luan. But it was still unclear whether the cannon he had was enough to trade for the opportunity to open the door to a new world. The young man stared at the ceiling without blinking, because he couldn't be sure that the cannon was in enough, and he couldn't explain where he got it from. At this time, somewhere in the 18th prison, someone was banging on the doors and begging to be let out. It was a guy with a countdown on his arm. He was scared and wanted to know why he was locked in there. He wouldn't stop banging on the doors and begging to be let out after a while. He even settled down out of impotence. With tears in his eyes, he turned his attention to the camera. He wondered why he was like this when he got there, because the others in the inner world had great lives, mechanical limbs, club members, and stuff. He didn't want to lie to his classmates when he returned to the real world. The boy stopped storming the door. He cried, hugging his knees and thinking about how he shouldn't have bragged in front of everyone before he came there. A while later, someone was already playing a game similar to checkers. Le Chatong plated himself, turning to his companion. He said that after he told Le Guang to keep a sense of proportion, there were fewer sobbing newcomers in the prison, and then asked if he had noticed that the other two factions in the prison were already very dissatisfied with Le Guang. Our hero did not take his eyes off the game and said that he knew everything usually. The three factions take turns to hold a ceremony to welcome newcomers, which is considered to be everyone's entertainment, but now that Lugani has taken this matter into his own hands, it will inevitably cause resentment from those around him. But he believes that he is capable of handling it on his own. Looking at the intimidated newcomers, the man asked our hero if he ever thought that all these newcomers might not be grateful to him for when you meet a beggar on the road and throw him some change. The change is not really enough to lift him out of poverty, but you buy a little inner peace and joy. The man gave a slight chuckle after saying that, and that's when the big guy sitting next to him abruptly moved away. Our hero noticed it himself but said nothing, but the big man pondered that if he could not win, you might need to join. So he informed the elder that he could be considered a respectable man in spades, especially why he should eat fake meat when the man along with our hero eat the real thing. The guy who terrorized our hero with nightmares grinned after hearing this and offered to fight their boss again, to which he replied that it's not always worth fighting and killing. After that, the big guy stuck his chopsticks into the synthetic meat too abruptly, and approaching our hero with a kind of threat, asked him to give him the food. The young man was still silent and looking up from under his forehead. None of the people in front of our hero reacted, so Chin Chin concluded that they wanted to test him, or rather observe how he would handle the situation. The big man, seeing that our hero was sitting motionless, moved his portion to himself, and then gestured that everyone saw that our hero himself refused. In that case, the man decided not to be ceremonious and began to eat, at which point there was silence all around. Our hero could hear the drops of sauce falling back onto the portion, but still sat unmoving. He closed his eyes and tried to replay in his mind everything that had happened up to that moment. He had an incredible number of pictures playing in his head of the big guy fighting Le Chutong. A second later, the young man said his assistant's name so loudly that the big man almost dropped his food. After a couple more seconds, El Guang appeared right beside our hero's feet. Chin Chin said with steely commonness that she would call out the numbers of the 8 people and the assistant would have to bring them over. At this time, the people at the table were still silent. Only the big guy didn't understand what was going on. In an instant, he began to get incredibly angry, and Lewin began to smile. As people approached the table, our hero asked the big man if it was his people standing. Hearing no answer, the boy inquired even louder and more seriously. The big man, losing color in his face, dryly replied that not everyone present was his people. And then the young man began to say that after the big guy was escorted there, he looked at 5 of them, and all 5 of them simultaneously extended their index fingers. Although the young man doesn't know what that G gesture means, he's pretty sure they were showing it to the big guy. The other 3 immediately looked at each other and exchanged glances. The guy who created our hero's nightmares couldn't understand how the young man could calmly watch in such a situation because, at that time, they only paid attention to the yasa and the hail of bullets and didn't care at all about watching everyone's reaction. And then, Le Xuan reported that there were all sorts of people mixed in prison 18, and it was quite normal for people from other forces to observe him there. The aide immediately asked if they needed to move all those people to other prisons. The man thought about it because transferring 8 people for no reason would give the outside world something to suspect. So he ordered Yuan to isolate the 8 and interrogate them one by one to find out who sent the other 3. At that time, our hero's assistant was pointing at these people. The man's assistant whispered to him that our hero had found all their people while Chin Chin stared at the people in front of him absent-mindedly, for it was time for his show. Leudo, having addressed to our hero affirmatively, informed that though the guy is not a superhuman, his ability to memorize and analyze is unmatched among many extraordinary people. At this time, the big guy noted to himself that our hero is not a human knight, so he wondered what the guy's name was. When he heard the name, he was very surprised at his health because he wondered when the knights had started cooperating with the Qing Consortium. And then the man wondered whether a person with the surname Qing is obliged to be part of the family, because even people from the family cannot stay in the family for the rest of their lives, and wondered, is there no very famous person with the surname Qing in the wild territory? Looking at our hero, the big guy couldn't answer anything. But after a couple moments, the guy asked our hero what his impression of the peaks was. The young man said rather glumly that it was not very good, and noted to himself that judging by the identity of the interocitor, he had come to compete with him for a forbidden object, so he should be friendly to him. At this time, a hail of bullets came down again, and within moments the corpses of people were visible on the floor, and even a little later they came to be inspected by those who cared. You won't notice that people have poison capsules in their mouths, hidden in the back molars. When you open your mouth, you can feel the faint smell of bitter almonds. It is cyanide. The big man approached the boss and affirmatively informed him that the dead were not from his peaks. The man was surprised, for the presence of the suicide bombers was very unexpected. But our hero sat and did not want to pay attention to the corpse lying nearby, only furtively looked. He realized that whether externally or internally, this was the first time he had faced death directly, and it made him uncomfortable. This prison, after all, is a world where wild beasts run rampant. The robots had already accepted the job, and our hero had 15 hours left. Le Chutan just watched the guy sitting across from him for a while, and then narrowing his eyes as much as possible, he asked the question that interested him the first time our hero sees death. Chin Chin faintly agreed. The man at this time already resembled a beast with fair eyes. He wondered if the guy was scared. The young man exhaled and reported that he was a little scared himself, and himself, wrapping his arms around himself, remembered that his teachers had taught him what is a function and what is a subject, predicate and complement, had taught him how to use everyday things. But no one taught him, and certainly no one told him what death was. Only by seeing it with his own eyes can one realize how shocking it is when life disappears before one's eyes. At this time, a man picked up a playing piece from the board and with some wisdom in his voice informed our hero that every man has 2 lives, and putting the item on the board, added that the second life begins when you realize there is only 1 life. And looking at the frightened face of the boy, the man concluded that from that moment, everyone begins to tell himself about the importance of time, and clearly realize how much time has been wasted. At this time, the guy relaxed his eyes a little and thought that the more afraid he was, the more he needed to stay calm. And then, making an income, decided that he needed to examine his past and needed to consider the future. The game was already in full swing. Li Shutong, sometime later, reported that there was a good chance that the 3 suicide bombers had come for him. So since our hero helped him find them, the man is pushed in front of Chin Chin. Smiling, the man told our hero that he could exchange the debt for one thing, and then asked what the guy wanted. Without hesitating or showing any sign of excitement, the young man waved his hand and said that he wanted a list of the members of the League Consortium. It seemed strange to the man after all. You could ask for a way to become superhuman, because in this world there are not many people who can make him owe it to them. But our hero is the only one who does not really cherish this opportunity. Well, the young man replied that promote superhuman in general cannot be equated with this mystery, and he does not think that it is worth it moreover. When the time comes, the man himself will give it to him, not me for anything. The man sat still and smiled, listening attentively to everything our hero said. After the guy said everything, the man said that he admires our hero because he is much smarter than it may seem, and more patient. Also, the guy is right that some things are not exchangeable, and he will get them when the time comes. Although the man is still a little disappointed that the young man did not see the blood because he carefully considered everything care. When Lewin picked up the game object, he reported with a sort of smirk that if a young man had contempt for life, it would be uninteresting. And then with a wave of his hand, he ordered one of the guys to bring the required list. The man was still curious as to why this list was necessary for the guy. He in turn exhaled, closed his eyes, and affirmatively said that this thing was not worth explaining. Lenin did not get angry at all, on the contrary. He liked it because this fee for a favor, and our hero can do whatever he wants. After a while, it was time to go back to the cell. Walking in, our hero remembered that he first thought that Lin Sha would come to test him with the sleep demon, but he didn't come, perhaps. The Shung thinks that there's no need to test him anymore. And going deep into the room, the guy realized that he vaguely felt that he was getting closer and closer to the path of the Superman. Closing his eyes, he realized clearly that waiting for the return this time was not as exciting as the previous few. And when he went to bed, he explained to himself that he had seen death with his own eyes. At this time, nothing had changed in the outside world. Even the birds and the trees were still singing. When he woke up, our hero stretched out his arm on which the countdown was going on again. At this moment, he thought that every time the moving process was silent, even a sleeping person couldn't be woken up. Putting on a clean shirt, the young man realized that being back in the outside world after 2 busy days could finally be relaxing. But still, he looked forward to moving again in 2 days. Opening the door, the guy admitted to himself that it was all because there were many times more opportunities waiting for him there. Walking out of his room, Chin Chin froze in surprise for a while. After he said hello to An Jiang and asked if there was anything wrong with the move, the woman smilingly replied that everything was fine and was going to take her daughter to school. And after a little thought, she offered to come to their house for a dinner party in the evening after school. Passing the landing, the young man suddenly wondered what they were going to celebrate. But the woman did not reveal the secret. And turning around, she said playfully that it would be much more interesting to talk about it at dinner tonight. After a while, our hero had already said goodbye to his neighbors and was on his way to school. The young man read the news on his phone on the way, and in the moment realized that just a few words meant that someone's life had been cut short, because reality is often bloodier than it sounds in words. And in a short time, the young man was in the courtyard of his educational institution. After walking some distance, the young man noticed that everyone admires Lu from the parallel class, because at first, our hero thought that he would get a psychological trauma like Hangishin and then take a break from studying, but never expected that he would turn out to be completely different. The young man was still standing behind the glass of the classroom in which the guy was. I understood that her better not only bragged about being a world traveler himself, but that he had gotten into prison 18, and even that he had met Li Shuten and talked to him. After all these terrible guesses and thoughts, the young man exhaled irritably and walked past the admiring crowd. Walking away from the classroom, Chin Chin knew that under the current circumstances, revealing oneself as a world traveler was a very foolish choice, especially claiming to know one of the most important people in the inner world. After a while, the young man bowed his head and desperately thought that this whole mysterious organization was about to manifest. Walking through the crowd, the young man saw an acquaintance with red hair. It was Nan Gin, who the guy immediately called out. Walking up to his classmate, the young man anxiously asked what was wrong, because the guy looked too depressed, but he in turn justified that he just did not sleep well. Chinin still noticed that although the friend does not have mechanical limbs, Still, the mood is not very good. The young man still didn't give up hope of finding out from his friend what had happened, so he assumed that he had been tortured after moving. But the boy pretended not to understand either of them, paying attention to the fact that girls were running around and discussing that Ludu from the next class was traveling. Chin Chin was almost certain that Nan Jun was moving around, but it was still curious what he was experiencing in the inner world, that his formerly important look had turned into a frightened look. Therefore, the young man did not miss the opportunity to ask what his friend did after the move, but he, in turn, was even more angry. So our hero decided that there is nothing to do, since his friend does not answer. He cannot find out his identity after the move, so there is nothing to think about helping him. When they arrived in the classroom to their workplace, the young people noticed that absolutely everyone continued to admire the guy from the parallel class. Nang Guan, looking at what was happening, completely styed his calmness and became even more upset, and at one point, almost in a whisper, asked our hero if he had said there was a group of world travelers. And at this point, the guy was a little relieved that his friend couldn't help himself. Looking at the Access eyes lying on the table, the classmate asked if he had said that someone was selling socks from the inner world. He had indeed said that earlier, and further said that it was all fake, and it didn't matter how he knew it anyway. He wasn't a traveler, you can't sneak socks from there. And further inquired if he had told how a traveler had said he could help connect with a rich woman. And at these words, our hero lost color in his face. But the classmate had already spoken and was angry. He justified himself by saying that he had read, and therefore knows that all this was said by other people in the group, and he is not a traveler at all. Our hero at this time only smiled and assumed that after moving his comrade was given to a rich woman. After a while, the two companions calmed down just as they had started the argument. But the people around were still fascinated by the traveler. In a moment, our hero inquired how much the young man was paid, but he still denied being a traveler, so he knows nothing. Their dialogue was interrupted by a voice from the school's public address system. This caught out absolutely everyone's attention. Some even got excited. No one knew the people who suddenly appeared and were accompanied by the head teacher himself. Our hero was very calm, but his party neighbor didn't look like that at all. There were men in black walking down the halls of the school. The appearance of the men in black quickly caught the attention of most of the students. After all, the unique and edgy temperament is too conspicuous in a month like a school. Our hero still remembers your feelings of oppression they caused him when they first met. Our hero quite watched through the slit from the open door. Now they really took Lu Toju, except that the organization that will accompany the community must be official. This is somewhat reassuring. But to the surprise of our hero, when the first lesson was coming to an end, the kid from the parallel class returned according to him. After he was taken to the office, the men in black asked him to leave his address and contact information, and he was told not to leave the city of Lo. The men in black told him that there were many world travelers in the city, and they were preparing a plan to bring them all together for an intense training session. After that, they also pulled out some pictures and asked him to determine if he knew the people in them. They suspected that the man in the picture was a world traveler because he appeared in the doorway of another world traveler. Based on the surveillance video, it was thought that as if this person's activities should be within a radius of 3 kilometers. But since the area is old, many places don't have cameras or they are broken, so they asked Lud Didu, and the person they are looking for is our hero. The young man exhaled heavily and realized that he had put on clothes he hadn't worn in 2 years, and deliberately avoided the security cameras. It seemed that all the precautions had not been in vain. At this point, his desk mates squealed and rejoiced that someone after the displacement was next to the boss. I also talked to him, and perhaps one day will become a superhuman. Our hero even seemed that the guy was jealous. The young man was already in full cry because it was impossible not to be Indus. He used to say that he would earn a lot of money and invite our hero to eat, but now it seems that he cannot. So our hero, patted on the shoulder, comrade suggested to start studying because there are still a lot of ordinary people who live a good life, and it is not necessary to be a traveler. The young man was really sad, so he didn't say anything. Looking out the window, Chin Chin asked his friend if he had paid for the textbooks, after all the time was already coming to an end. But the comrade had a very difficult family situation and could only ask his abusive father for money. After the guy, with some embarrassment, said his father told him to go to school, give the information shocked our hero, because who would have thought that the question of paying for one textbook would have stumped 2 world travelers? So, gaining a whole lungful of air, the young man came to the conclusion that it was time to think how to make money. He walked even closer to the window and realized that all the old people had become smart and no one would want to play shangi with him. So he had to think about how to earn money in the inner world. And then our hero thought, so there is no reason to be near the mountain of treasure, but time after time to return empty-handed is not good. After a while, our hero ran out of class and passed by a cake sale. When he was little, his mom would go to his grandmother's house and his dad would take him outside and buy low-rice noodles. He didn't gamble yet. Then he and his mom hadn't divorced, and his grandparents didn't despise him yet. Passing by the windows of the cafe, our hero knew that rice noodles, which cost very little now, cost 5 or even more times as much. So it made him realize once again that nothing could be returned. While entering his apartment complex, the young man noticed some 2 men smoking cigarettes. It made the guy worry and alert. But at one point, the guy is met by a girl who calls him brother. She went out to meet our hero to call upstairs for dinner. Our hero, it was a pleasant surprise, because he could stay at school in the evening, self-training. But the girl noticed that the last few days, he does not go anywhere. After a while, the cheerful girl dragged our dazed hero by the hand to her mom's apartment. The guy was very surprised that the broken furniture in the house is no longer there, and certainly many things have been replaced with new ones. The woman did not take a break from cooking, noticed that our hero came, and suggested to sit down at the table quickly, and she only had to finish the soup. As he approached the table, the boy noted that everything looked very appetizing compared comped to the bland food in prison. 18, this was a real improvement in nutrition. After that, the guy anxiously turned to the woman and once again asked what they were celebrating, and the woman, as if nothing had happened, repeated the previously told news. She opened a mechanical clinic in the inner world, and putting the soup on the table, she explained that this clinic used to bother her a lot because memory is not transferable. And when people came to her to put mechanical limbs, she didn't know what to do, and those who came for mechanical limbs were very scary. And with the public order in the city, the worst at night. It is not safe to walk on the street after 8 o'clock in the evening, so she was very worried. And sitting down at the table, she said she didn't know how it happened at all. But this time, after the move, people from the League Consortium came to her little clinic and asked for a partnership. The woman was indeed very happy, for the consortiums in the inner world rule everything, and as long as he is in the share, all criminals will bypass her. They not only gave her money, but also changed the neon sign to Lee's logo. Stirring the rice in his plate, our hero reflected on the Lee family, and afterwards, smiling, said that it was all really worth celebrating. The woman, still smiling, added that now she didn't need to bother our hero anymore, and the girl's grandparents didn't need to come over either. But suddenly she asked if our hero was not jealous of travelers before, because if the guy really once moved, then let him come to the city and find her. Maybe she won't do anything like that, but she will definitely be able to protect. Our hero was making a calm appearance as much as possible. After all, he is already in City 8, and it is a pity that ordinary people in his situation will not help the battle for Chen's shadow, and more have long surpassed the understanding of ordinary travelers. To take the conversation in another direction, our hero asked what the men in black were and why they were always looking for her to which she replied that she was rather looking for them. The woman became a little sad, because it was before she entrusted our hero with her daughter. She wanted to contact them and see if she could get their help in the inner world. But they said that their organization had just been founded, and they were having a hard time there, so they couldn't help. After a while, the woman went to wash the dishes, and our hero watched her. Then the guy popped down on the couch next to the girl eating chips, and as if nothing had happened, you affirmatively said that the girl was also a traveler. The little lady didn't understand what it was about, so she even asked again, but the guy didn't answer anything. And after that, he looked and began to say that last time she specifically asked her mum for the name of the clinic as a result. This time they bought a share from her in order to protect her. The girl, of course, can deny, but he can also tell about these clues to Mum. The little lady was terrified her hands were falling off, and she begged not to tell her mum. The guy watched the girl trembling with fear and realized that his assumptions were correct. After all, it was for this purpose that he asked the Shatong for a list of the Lee Consortium, and Lunian name is there. The girl was very upset when she heard our hero ask why she didn't tell her mother. The lady sadly replied that few people in the inner world dare to point it out to her, but if her mother found out, she would definitely try to intervene. And after that, she got angry again and asked not to tell her mother, even offered money, because she has a lot of it in the inner world. Our hero again repeated that he is not a traveler, so he does not need money from the inner world. The girl hesitated, and the young man repeated again that he was not a traveler, and he thought that she might suspect that he was asking about a lot of things. But fortunately, he was quick enough to refuse the money. And after a while, an awkward silence hung between the two. In 1 minute, the guy asked how much pocket money the girl had in the inner world. The girl got worried that the young man was going to take it all away. After a short squeal, she told him in an incredibly sincere manner that she had no money in the outside world, and therefore offered to change the conditions. He did not understand anything. But the girl once again asked him not to tell her mum anything. After that, the young man began to get up and asked her to tell her everything herself, because you can't forget to take care of your mother in the inner world, and he sees everyone saying that this world is very confusing. At this point, the young lady was very happy and asked not to worry, because when our hero will have the opportunity to go to the inner world, she will protect him as well. The guy only looked at the girl affectionately and smiled at him. Afterward, he went to his room. Sitting down on the edge of the bed, the young man concluded that overall the evening had been very useful. At least Leon Yun's identity as a traveler had been confirmed. Now that he was involved in the battle for the Chen Shadow, it was better to have another friend than not to have one at all. Looking at the messages in the phone, the young man realized that to bring things from the inner world, people directly use this extreme method. If a rich man is dying of cancer, and his only hope is a life-saving cure from the inner world, he can pay any price. But it was not clear what was the purpose of people and what price could be equivalent to life. After all, while he was still thinking about how to become a superhuman, someone had already started a business. If you exchange things directly, it would inevitably reveal his identity. However, he can't use this method now. Of course, you can transfer the technology on a flash drive, but as a traveler can get the most important inner world technology maybe in the future, but not now. The guy was still looking at something on his phone and realized that it was still difficult to access even outside information in prison. 18. So the most important thing right now is to maintain a good relationship with Le Chatong. But in an instant, the guy's eyes really narrowed, and something caught his eye. From the list, the guy realized that these mysterious organizations also buy mechanical limbs. Just a few days ago, the traveler's legs were cut off, and now these people are buying them at exorbitant prices. And then he remembered the guys he'd seen at the entrance to the apartment complex Without a second's hesitation, the young man approached the window to make sure. But when he looked at the place, there was no one there. It was empty. At that moment, the guy took the phone and dialed the police. He gave the address and then said that he had met two very suspicious men in the evening and thought they were up to something. A second later, the boy was pierced by the sound of Leonian's scream. Incredibly nervous, the guy asked for a police squad to be sent immediately. After that, the young man grabbed a shovel and thought there were two grown men there, maybe even more. And now, standing on the doorstep of his apartment, he doubted he could handle them. The young man thought about it for only a second and then gripped the shovel even tighter. Walking out of the door, he realized that he is not a nice guy at all, and also he is very selfish and seeing classmates going crazy in prison. 18, he would be indifferent. But he can't just sit by and watch a child like Lee Toonan face cruelty. Coming to the source of the noise, the guy froze with a shovel in his hands because a man was flying straight at him. There was a man lying on the stairs who'd been guarding someone earlier, and just above could be seen the excited neighbor of our hero. They stood there for a few minutes just looking at each other, and noticing the shovel of our hero, the woman thanked. The young man asked how many other people there were, as he heard that one of them had run away and asked if the girl was all right, but it turned out that she was just frightened. Running downstairs, our hero said that he had called the police, so it was now worth taking care of Sha Yunan. Running out into the street, our hero noticed a man running away. After that, he ran in the opposite direction. After all, a plan for the complex had already surfaced in his head, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Even the walls didn't hinder him. He jumped over them with ease, and in an instant the guy stopped and lurked around one of the corners preparing his shovel to strike. Although the young man looked confident at this moment, he really felt uncomfortable. The guy began to exhale heavily and sweat. But when he heard footsteps, he immediately picked up the shovel. The young man was mentally counting down, and you could see in his eyes as he visualized the impact. In an instant, the guy hit with all his strength right into the running man's knee. And at the moment when the man was squirming and screaming in pain, our hero was already running away. After a while, he was already on the landing of his house. At the door was waiting for him frightenedly. Nan Gong, who also clung to her mother, tried to tell our hero that the other ran away, but the guy hurried to comfort her. The woman saw the wounded hand of our hero and asked to wait a few minutes, and she would bring a bandage with iodine. And our hero mentally rejoiced that except for the wound on his hand, there were no more. Looking at his wound on his arm, the young man realized that after all, he was still an ordinary person, and now he had a powerful brain, but not a corresponding body. Before the woman entered the apartment, our hero asked Jay Shu not to worry, because he has the same things at home, and since the police will soon arrive, he better go back to his place. Turning to the woman, the guy smiled very kindly and asked her to remember that he had done absolutely nothing in this situation. The woman apprehensively and slightly tiredly agreed. Walking up the stairs to his apartment, the guy realized that he needed to speed up the process of acquiring abilities in the inner world. And the next morning, when our hero was still asleep, someone was calling him. It was the frightenedly Nan Gong who came running in and asked for her mother's help. Our hero's neighbor's mechanical limbs were discharged, and the woman was depressed. Upon entering the room, the young man was a bit confused after all. How could the people in the inner world withstand high-intensity battles if their limbs were not so durable? The woman explained that the inner world had already completed, upgrading the wireless charging power sources, and everyone's equipment was constantly charging. Everyone has their own account number to pay just like an ID number, as long as someone pays monthly, also can enjoy a comfortable life, and the consortium based on each person's energy consumption will charge. Jianshu said that in the inner world, there were condenser towers that generated energy and a cloud tower that carried energy everywhere, even in the wilderness. There were cloud towers scattered about. But wilderness transportations still choose plant engine, especially military diesel engine, has high energy, high RPM, and high torque, which is more suitable for military use, heavy off-road conditions. But in fact, because contraband is too common, getting out of the city is quite problematic. You have to go through customs set up by the tax department and get a visa. The financial structure of the inner world is very strong. They not only have their own executive agencies, but also their own intelligence services. But of all the information available so far, the more useful one is that the hard currency in the domestic world is also gold. The banks of the 5 major consortii actually issue currency based on gold reserves. And then our hero grinned, for at last he knows how to make money in the inner world. After a short story, the young man still asked what he could be useful. She replied that the main problem was that because of her hands, she couldn't cook for Exe Yunnan. And bowing her head and a little embarrassed, she asked me to take care of her daughter. The girls still looked scared. She asked our hero to cook something for them. The guy was still smiling because for him, it was not a problem. And at that moment, someone knocked on the door and wondered if anyone was home. In a moment, the young man noticed an SUV of a mysterious organization parked under the window and became wary. Tying the apron, Chin Chin asked the girl to go and open the door to the guests, and he would go to the kitchen to cook. She cheerfully agreed. And within a couple of moments, this girl's mom saw people standing in the doorway. It was indeed the same people from the secret organization. The first one introduced himself as Luan. The young man, sorting out the food in the refrigerator, heard everything understood, that the organization is called Konin, that he heard the woman ordered the girl to pour water for the guests. Men, noticing the motionless hands, wondered what was wrong with them. The woman replied the same as our hero. After hearing this, Lu Yuan ordered his partner to take note of it, and the latter started to write something down in his notebook. At this time, our hero concluded, standing near the sink, that these people did not know that mechanical limbs could discharge their organization, may have been formed only recently, so they know little of the inner world. The moment the girls served the glasses of water, the men became curious about something. Lu Yuan affirmatively said that there were people near their house last night, and after one of them ran away, he was attacked and his shin was broken. Our hero was very surprised to hear this, and even more surprised when the men asked who had done it. And so, standing near the kitchen table, the young man heard the man reassure his neighbor that they were not there to prosecute, but to just figure things out. The young men sat in silence for a while, and after that, the woman smiled softly and said that they don't know at all who did it, and maybe someone wanted to help, and there was no need to investigate it, and the woman herself understood that they should not find our hero in any case, because he did all this for the sake of her daughter. And then Luan asked not to misunderstand them. After all, they are not law enforcement, so they do not want to do anything about the brave man. The other confirmed that after the criminal story, they found that that person very cunningly chose the time to strike the moment to ambush is very unusual. So they want to look at this person personally and check if he is a traveler. And the girl intervened in the conversation. She stretched out thoughtfully and reported that the day before, she and her mum were at home and didn't go out anywhere. Needless to say, our hero also heard the girl claim she didn't know anything, and the guy thought that the little lady's explanation actually added plausibility, because most people subconsciously feel that children can't lie. But a little lowering his gaze, the young man thought about the fact that Leong Yun and he grew up in a very similar environment. The same quarrels, parents, also domestic violence. Intuition tells him that he and she are of the same D. The girl kept proving that she didn't know, and on the contrary, even tried to find out who was trying to help them. But in fact, underneath her calm exterior, she had the same rage raging in her heart. Luan smilingly leaned over the table and said that the girl had misunderstood everything. In fact, they have no malicious intent, since the organization is just established. They need to find except a few talented, like-minded people. And looking at the two frightened women, the man added that apart from all this, there is actually a separate organization and consortiums in the inner world, which discovered the existence of the outer world, and according to their data, 21 travelers died inexplicably, and before their death, they were tortured, and more than 10 travelers Dolly understood that they were captured by the organizations of the inner world. And looking already at the woman's frightened face, the man concluded that he hoped the woman would be vigilant and not be discovered by them. The man tried for a long time to unnoble the woman. She just accepted and agreed, but in fact, it was a revelation to her that there are such organizations in the inner world. At one point, Lean's partner, some guy, showed up again. The girl heard the name and assumed that this guy knew a lot of things. The men were surprised, but said they were looking for this man because he was good at hiding, and he was supposed to have left some clues. But now, everything about him has been erased. And in a moment, the men realized that it was time for them to leave because they had already told too much, and the woman in turn asked for forgiveness because now she was constrained and could not see them off. But at one moment, Lua noticed something that confused him. The man asked whose shoes were at the door. The woman immediately replied that it was her husband's, and the girl squealed that it was her daddy's. A man opens the door awkwardly to apologize. After the men left, the two ladies breathed a sigh of relief, and in the moment, our hero appeared and apologized for the trouble they had caused. But the woman asked not to talk like that because they were the ones who had caused our hero trouble, and if it wasn't for him, he wouldn't have gotten involved. There was still not much food on the kitchen table, as there was no food in the refrigerator, so our hero offered to go get what he needed. A short time later, the young man was already entering his apartment. Our hero decided to change his shoes. At the moment when the young man was standing at the traffic light, he was observed by people who had come to the apartment of the neighbor earlier. Sheenan did not give absolutely no sign. He was as calm as ever. The men just watched through the ajar window of the car. Their attention was drawn to the young man's shoes, and after a moment one of them had a cigarette. Lewin somehow frustratedly stretched out that this was not our hero. The partner sitting next to him tried to tell the first one that he knew very well that there was someone else in the house, and it looked like he was hiding from them. So it was possible to just barge, and without looking to, which he replied that the boss explained to them that Con is only the main one, and they have to maintain good relations with travelers. They use brutal methods, especially they don't need anyone else they don't. Why men frowned a little and continued, what they want to do in the future is to find those who are on their way with them. So it is necessary to wait a little if they wait. Nothing terrible will happen. In any case, a new age has begun, and the some are not destined to be ordinary. After a while, our hero was already walking around the supermarket. In his thoughts, he did not understand why Lu Yuan revealed so much information after all. Even the company does not know who Hayasha is. Kunon did not recruit him. Looking at the screen of the phone, the guy realized that in today's society, where the internet is extremely advanced, erasing one's own footprints is basically impossible. Heisha must have possessed something beyond this time, a technology beyond the understanding of the people of the modern world, or an ability. He shall called those who move as world travelers. When moving to the inner world, the time of the outer world stops. When returning, the time of the inner world also stops. Currently, it is known that travelers within the country appear in 19 cities scattered. Travelers may appear in other regions, but the likelihood is very small. Hishash suggested that those who want to become travelers should go to these cities as soon as possible, because the third batch of travelers would appear the next evening. Since the inner world game is extremely difficult, he believes that all the travelers can unite to explore the inner world by themselves, which can increase the chances of survival. Approaching the meat shop, the young man still concluded that not all travelers were so smart in prison. 18, there was a hidden danger that Ludu would not be able to withstand the interrogation at all. And receiving the ordered meat, the young man decided that only he did not expect that he, Shasha, still consider that world a game. But it is quite predictable that he is the most famous traveler. This strategy will inevitably cause a great resonance even can buy their own strength to speed up the process of gathering people who want to become travelers in the 19 cities. And looking at his correspondence with his friend Chinin, decided that the in-world incident had indeed spawned quite a few rogues. Leaving the supermarket, our hero frustratedly thought that sometimes still cannot realize whether he is really so stupid or still pretending. After a while, our hero noticed that the Konon people had left, and after a little more time, the young man cooked meat and more. The girl carefully fed her mom, which she was happy about. Our hero calmly sat eating and reasoning that in order to protect his daughter Yan Shui, with an originally soft character, decided to become tougher. And after taking a new portion of food, he also thought that Leun Yun was sure that after this transition, she would definitely be able to arrange better mechanical limbs for his mother, and he should rely only on himself. At one point, the woman decided to ask where our hero's parents disappear because they very rarely appear. The guy frowned slightly and said that they are very busy people. But what surprised him even more was that the woman noticed that our hero's washing machine was broken, and since they knew each other well, she offered to bring dirty clothes and she would wash everything. And after school, she offered to come to her place to eat. The woman really glowed from within and ended her dialogue by saying that even if our hero didn't come, she still had to cook for Sha Yunan, so she could add some food for our hero as well. The embarrassed boy could only thank his roommate for such a generous offer. The time was nearing midnight, which meant that our hero was about to move on and become more experienced. Passing the glass barrier, the guy thought about the fact that if someone asked him now for a choice of where he should stay to live in the inner world, or in the outer world, he might even choose the inner one. At this time, the guy who had been incarcerated earlier was still screaming and begging to be let out. Our hero was already lying on his prison bed and tried to ignore it, and even smiled at one point, or rather, when he heard the welcome speech for the newcomers. It was already noon in the inner world, and our hero was just getting out of bed. Something he saw shocked him. This time, the countdown town is a whole week long. Our hero didn't understand anything, and decided that it was time for him to go out, especially since there was already a ruckus outside his cell. Passing by people, or rather prisoners, all bowed to him for some reason, and those who didn't want to were forced to. As he approached the railing, the young man saw his assistant. He looked happy and was showing a sign that all was well. The young man tried not to look at the way the newcomers were greeted for, although Lug Guani might anger the other two forces in this way. It couldn't be said for sure that it would definitely cause conflict one day. But he went to prison 18 to pay the way for our hero to be a pawn. Before the horse, one must realize himself a pawn. Before the horse, a pawn that has crossed the river cannot retreat. Success means life, defeat, death. Fame will be obtained at the cost of life. Besides, Le Chatong also did not mind El Guang's behavior. He even wanted to see what our hero was going to do. On this day, 7 new prisoners arrived when Lu Guang caught the newcomers. 6 of them appeared to have entered the prison for the second time and decided to directly accept their fate experienced. Prisoners know well that it is better to be patient, and if you resist, it will only get worse. However, when Lu Guang was catching the last new prisoner, he kept dodging, but this prisoner has no mechanical limbs with his normal physical fitness. There was no way he could escape from such ferocious steel beasts. When they tried to grab him, he was in the sawdust, and when they cornered him and asked him not to touch him at all, and even threatened him. But nobody understood anything. The young man heard this and realized that the new prisoner was from Chuan province, hence a traveler. Later, he began to wonder how this guy, with a mouthful of such horrible words, could get into prison, because according to the rules that Shah had previously deduced, there are only 19 cities in the country where many travelers appear, and a traveler from the same place also goes to the same place, so people from the city and goes to the same prison as him. The young man stood on the floor where his cell was located and didn't notice his so-called buddy looking at him. He couldn't understand how this happened. After all, he made the rules himself. At one point, the man ordered his subordinates to catch the guy and question him thoroughly, also need to catch Hang Jishin and Lu, who arrived earlier. After all, the man thinks they may be from the same place. Our hero at this time furtively thought that the man is definitely not a fool and can notice something in these successive incidents. It is a matter of time before the people in the inner world learn about the outer world because there are too many travelers. And looking at this guy, it was clear that he had made Leon relate all the weirdness that had happened during this period of time. The guy who knows how to control dreams at one point shone his bright yellow eyes. To be more precise, it was Eli Shatong who untied Lai Shia's hands, so the man was already losing consciousness. When the man fell down, our hero's assistant wanted to stop him, but Lin Sha asked him to stop. The young man looked at our hero, wondering what he should do. Everyone around was very surprised. Why does Lu Guang behave like this after all? He is also the boss, and some people were uncomfortable that he obeyed our hero. At one point, Lin Sha asked the guy he was acting like this, knowing who his boss was. But our hero, watching this picture, only furtively nodded, thus giving permission for further action. Lin Sha didn't hesitate. He took the fallen guy by his clothes and dragged him without making much effort and leaving the surprised prisoners behind him. But our hero was shocked by the fact that Eli Shutan and his men are free to come and go from the prison. And looking at the man himself, the guy wondered why they didn't leave there since they could roam freely. In an instant, the guy appeared in front of the man and made a move on the game board. Chin Ching wondered where Lai Sha had gone, to which the man replied that something unusual had happened, although he couldn't figure out what it was at the moment. Stroking his kip, the man assumed that it must be something beyond his imagination, for in the past, if strange people appeared around him, one after another, he would have thought that someone might have made a careful plan and wanted to get something out of him. But this time it seems to be different. They have no plan and seem to have no brains. Our hero was already sitting across the table at this time and realized that he didn't have much time at all. Not to mention the Changai Lu Du alone would definitely not be able to resist Lin Xiaxia's interrogation. Yet, he possesses a mysterious dream demon ability that can make people discreetly tell the truth. During interrogation, the exposure of the outside world is inevitable and will happen soon enough. At this time, the bulky man was eating meat again. Li Shan's remaining subordinate asked the bulky man not to make such a big deal out of the fact that the man who had been taken away was one of his men, for he had heard that there were still a few places in the wilderness where strange languages were spoken. The man, wiping his mouth from the remains of the food dry, informed that it was not one of his men. This guy did not look like a native of the wilderness, and then asked now if the guy had ever met a man in wilderness with such delicate skin. After that, the man laughed loudly and patted our hero on the shoulder, saying that Chin Chin had discovered his men and asked him not to worry, because now it could be said that he had come alone. And then, resting his elbows on the table, he asked his assistant if he could get some meat for his brothers as well. It was surprising to the guy that there wasn't enough real meat in the wilderness. The guy, twirling the sticks in his hands, informed them that they were facing consortium raids almost every day, so they were unlikely to have time to raise livestock. Besides, there were 2 more forbidden places where people had almost died, and the possibilities for survival were not as great as many people thought. And looking at our hero, concluded his dialogue was something to the effect that if a young man went there, he would definitely have food. Chin Chin looked skeptically at the man sitting next to him and noticed that forbidden place was a new term, and it sounded like it had something to do with forbidden items. The man embraced our hero and asked why he should not go with him into the wasteland, and was not ashamed to say that a man like our hero should have whatever he wanted and could eat whatever he wanted. Li Shong, over this dialogue, asked why the man wants to drag our hero into the wilderness because he is from the Chen family, and why he wondered if the opportunity to become a shadow is not better than the wasteland. The man exploded because it was unacceptable for him to compare these two things, because it is not yet known whether our hero will become a shadow because the choice of a shadow is extremely dangerous, and if a young man goes with her to the wasteland, he will have everything. Le Chaton was still very calm this time. He was curious about what there was in the wasteland that made others should go there with him. The man swallowing drooling reported that there were drawn flatbreads, at which time our hero did not utter a word. Noticing the time, the young man noted that Lin Sha should be back soon. And still in the company of Lutan, his subordinate, and a thug, the young man is firmly resolved that he will face the most dangerous test of his life, and he has none of the hidden trump cards. Closing his eyes, the guy tried to focus on the fact that he knew what he was going to face, but he couldn't hide. And when I opened my eyes, I realized there was nowhere to hide. At this time, the guy who passed out was in the interrogation room and sleeping. Lin Sha looked very tired because the type sitting opposite was constantly scolding him and then abruptly snapped out of his nightmare and never once repeated himself in half an hour. At one point, the guy collapsed on the table out of nowhere, and Lai Sha thought about the harvest there because a guy named Lu, that he is a high school student who moved from a parallel universe, and in Luo City, where he lives, there are a lot of such travelers, so they all move randomly, and no one knows where they will end up before they pass the border. However, still one thing is worrisome. Ludu said that the reason why he went to the boss was because someone said that if he found Le Choutong in prison 18, who could get a development path, so it is necessary to find out who is spreading such information. Standing up from the table, the guy realized that even though these movements are incomprehensible to the mind, there are no logical inconsistencies in the whole story of the kid, from beginning to end. And when the guy finally woke up, Lai Sha jumped up to him and said that there was one last question left. Smiling, he inquired if the young man had ever heard a song called Goodbye. After a while, it was time for a late supper where our hero was with Le Chaton. As he devoured the synthetic meat, the young man realized that Lin Sha was intelligent and calculating. However, he did not possess cunning. He returned to the dining room, but he kept silent about the results of the interrogation he had just conducted, so the result is already very clear. The results of the inquiry contained a secret that concerns someone present, and that person is most likely our hero. But it was unclear how Leighton would look at this. He is a high-ranking person who controls everything. Such a person would not let events get out of control, no matter what he earned his favor. It was not worth mentioning in front of such a big man. When the meal was over, the man folded his chopsticks neatly and asked the Sha standing next to him to take the man from the peaks to another place. When the man was asked to stand up, he resisted and said he wasn't going anywhere. And it was at that very moment that Li Shuten, who was sitting across from him, raised his index finger, and the man began to be hammered back into the forming dome. Lin Sha warned the man that if he was still there because of the forbidden item, he shouldn't approach anymore. The man started to say that it was in no way because of that, and he had heard nothing of the sort. The young man at this time just kept quiet. Li shut arms, stroking his cat, asked our hero if he had told Lu Guang to interrogate the new prisoners in the last few days. The guy immediately agreed. This was said more Cly than he imagined after all. When he was in our hero's position and age, he wasn't as good as Chin. But it's not commonness. Just panic is useless. Although Xia Sha hasn't told the result of the interrogation yet, the guy is sure that it's definitely a big secret. He has always been ruthless when facing something he can't control. In an instant, Leon became incredibly serious and somber and asked our hero if he had ever thought he might not live to see another day. The young man only lowered his gaze and remained silent. At this time, there was a ruckus outside the dome. The robots were in control as usual, as well as cameras with directional rubber bullets. Our hero, who was in the dome sometime later, answered the question he sometimes thought of such a development. Crossing his arms on the table, if X lower his head, the guy admitted that it was actually very nice to chat for a few days, and if the man opposite would allow it, he hoped they could get to know each other again. The man also admitted that the first day he beat him at Juni, so he is still in debt, and if there is any request, our hero can now say it. The young man offered to play the goodbye song once more. This surprised the man, for it was possible to exchange debt for life. Chin-chan, as calm as ever, said that there was no need to exchange anything, nor could he exchange it. When the man was given the instrument, he confessed that he had always liked the boldness of our hero, and so he might consider this song a gift from him, and the request could be said at any other time. And in an instant, the man began to play. A melodious song enveloped the entire prison space. The young man in turn sank into reminiscence and thanked. Time passed, and it was already midnight in prison 18. Out of the blue, someone walked into our hero's room, and without thinking too long, he threw a black sack over his head. Why did these people start taking the young man out of the jail cell? On reaching the right room, the men threw our hero together with a bag over his head and his hands tied on the floor. They didn't do anything else, just left closing the doors. Chin-chan found himself as if he was in the darkest place in the entire universe all alone. After a while, the young man dared to pull the sack off his head and sigh. As he stood up, he realized he was in an enclosed dark space, though he didn't know where he was. He still couldn't talk to people, and was even deprived of the concept of time. The lonely less and fear seemed to have completely gotten to him. After remembering some moments, the guy came to the conclusion that he is not really afraid of loneliness at all. Since his parents divorced, he has been living alone. After a little thought, he lay back down on the floor, licking his lips. The guy realized that at the moment, the lack of water would be his worst enemy. And while this report can't illuminate other places, it can at least help him count time. The young man exhaled as heavily as possible, closing his eyes. He imagined he was in some sort of large room with lots of seats. It was a movie theater because he decided that if nothing could be done, it was better to watch an imaginary movie, the subject of which was a prison break. Mentally, our hero has watched 8 movies and even taken a nap, but he still can't stop the thirst and hunger, but it doesn't matter. Lying on the floor, he realized that the playbacks in his head had become intermittent. His body was suddenly cold and hot, and his skin was dry, probably caused by the loss of water in his body. The fellow looked very bad indeed, for he could not even sleep, and it was almost certain that his spirit was undermined. It was deep night in the prison again. Le Chatong and his men heard Lu Guang demanding to be let out of solitary confinement with his boss, and the guy also swore that he wouldn't just let it all go. Lin Shasha glanced at the dial from time to time where everything was already at 0. Counting a little, the young man excitedly noted that 4 days had already passed, and then leaning over reported that in all this time our hero had not uttered a word, and there was no sign of a breakdown. The man thoughtfully remarked that the young man was extremely intelligent. From the first day he noticed the frequency of breathing to avoid rapid loss of water, and there is nothing unusual about lasting 4 days. The young man waved his hands. Even if it's like this, a rare person can endure 4 days of silence. Our hero doesn't look like he's torturing. It's more like he's waiting, but he hasn't drank water for days, and if he doesn't drink water, he'll die, and should be spared. The second assistant picked up on this idea and began to ask for it too. But the man only furtively said that it was necessary to move on to water torture.